So we have our checks perfectly configured now, so that App Center actually updates GitHub as soon as there is a pull request or a new commit inside of that pull request. So there can be some information about those builds directly inside of GitHub. And in fact, we have already used those checks as additional protection for a couple of our branches. Now in this lecture, what I want to do, even though one of these builds, the Android one, was immediately cancelled, is merge this pull request, the one from feature tree, directly into dev. So I can pull all of these changes to my local repository and work on a new feature. Just so we can see the entire flow of information directly from our IDE on Visual Studio in our case, over to GitHub, and of course the continuous integration process being triggered. So I will simply merge this pull request directly into dev, and I will confirm this merge. And so all of this, as we have seen before, is now inside of dev, so I can get rid of the feature tree branch. Now what I want to do is all of this new code that exists inside of dev, have it available locally. So of course that will mean that I have to go over to my terminal, and for one I can get rid of feature 1, the one that I was using before, because all of this has actually already been pushed over to GitHub. We're way ahead of feature 1. So for that, the first thing that I will do is check out to dev. And now that I am not on feature 1, I can execute git branch -d and feature 1. This is going to delete feature 1. And of course it says it's not fully merged because we merged everything over on GitHub. We know that the merge already happened, but it happened on GitHub and we haven't pulled everything from there. So I will have to do is change this D to be capital D. So it just forces the deletion. We know that our feature 1 was already over on GitHub and it was merged into dev, so we can actually delete this. So there it is. It is deleted now. If I execute git branch, the feature 1 is no longer here. Now currently I am on dev, but if I execute git log, I don't yet see all of those new commits. These are already a few days old. So what I will have to do is execute git pull. And because my dev branch is already tracking the remote dev branch, it knows where to get the information from. So I will just execute git pull. And there it is. I have all of those new commits directly into my local dev branch. And I can confirm that by navigating over to Visual Studio for Mac in my case and check the things that are inside of app.saml.cs. These app secrets should be the new ones. So I see these app secrets right here. Let me go ahead and check over on GitHub in the dev branch in the app.saml.cs file if these are indeed the same keys, and they appear to be the same keys both locally and on the remote. So we have all now locally as well. The thing that I want to do in here is add a small new feature so we can start the entire flow of first, of course, creating a new branch here in Visual Studio, a feature branch that eventually will be pushed over to the remote and eventually will trigger an entire continuous integration process through a pull request. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, before actually creating the pull request, I want to start the flow a little bit differently. And this is the way in which you may start flows when you are working on a team. Usually, on the Issues tab, you may create a new issue. That doesn't necessarily have to be an issue, maybe this is going to be a feature. And so this feature is going to be to apologize to users after crash. And I can add some comment in here just to describe this feature a little bit more, and I can assign it to myself, and I can set the label to be enhancement or something like that. I could even have some projects. I am not going to be focusing too much here on GitHub on things that are not necessarily related to CI and CD, but I will create this new issue. So normally here is where things start. I see that this issue is being assigned a new ID. Now it is the first issue that I create, but this ID is also shared with pull requests. And since we have already had 5 pull requests, you can see that this one was the number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 that is still open over here. So the issue is now identified through number 6. This ID right here is the one that you would usually use when creating your branches. So remember that this issue right here is issue number 6. And again, normally it is in this way in which the entire flow of adding new features or solving new bugs inside of your application starts. So with that in mind, that this is issue number 6, I will navigate over to Visual Studio, over to version control, and manage branches and remotes. I could of course be doing this from the terminal as well. And I'm going to create a new branch that is going to be feature 6. This 6 right here, it doesn't refer to being the 6th feature that I'm adding, it just refers back to the identifier of the issue that was created. This branch is not going to be tracking any branches. I will just click on OK. I will select it and I will switch to this branch. And I can double check that that is the selected branch here on Visual Studio and over on the terminal. Over on the terminal, I can execute git branch and see that indeed feature 6 is the one that is selected. So again, that 6 refers back to the identifier of the issue. So perfect, we can now start working on this issue, apologize to users after a crash. And indeed, that is something that we can do. Since we are implementing App Center crashes, in addition to it being able to track the crashes and enable us to track errors, we can actually identify when a crash happened as soon as the application is opened again. And so we can use that information to apologize to our users for that inconvenience. And so what I can do is immediately after the application starts here on the start, but also after I have started the services, I can check with a boolean if the app crashed. Did app crash? And this can be assigned to something that will be able to come from crashes. So this is still the class that is coming from the crashes namespace from Microsoft.App Center. And crashes is going to contain the has crashed in last session async method. This is going to return a boolean if in the last session that the application was opened, it crashed. And of course this is an async method, so I will have to await this and make the onStart an async method. But as soon as we await this, we are now going to have in the did app crash whether or not our application crashed in the previous session. So if it did, if did app crash is true, I can use the main page, which is a property of the application that is also now part of the app, to display an alert. And I don't know, set the string to I am sorry, set some message and set the cancel button. Something like this. And since I'm already on an async method, I can even await the display alert method. So there you have it. Now, for us to be able to test this, I am going to navigate back to the login page, I believe, where indeed we are currently, at the moment of the login button being pressed, sending this event. What I want to do in this case is generate a test crash similar to what we did before. So this is just going to be a quick test. From the crashes namespace then, and I will need a using directive in here, I am going to call the generate test crash method. This, as we have seen before, is going to crash our application. What we want to test is if the next time that I open my application after this crash, are we going to be able to see this message? So I'm going to run this on my simulator, and I am using the iOS simulator in here. Of course, this is going to work exactly the same on Android. And let me actually stop this because I didn't realize I am adding this instead of the try catch. So of course, any exception that this throws is going to be catched, so it's not actually going to crash the application. Let me just cut this and paste it outside of the try-catch block, so any exception that gets thrown is not catched and the application actually crashes. So let's try this one more time. I'm going to run the application. I see the application up and running, click the login button to navigate over to the login page, click the other login button and the application crashes. I can click on continue to see the application is now frozen. Eventually it is going to be closed. So the application crashed. Now to check if the feature that I added, I don't have to run it again from Visual Studio. I can just right here from the simulator just open the application again. And as soon as it loads, it does show me that I am sorry message. Indeed, our feature works. Whenever the application crashes, in the next session, the next time the user opens the application, this small message is going to appear. So perfect, the feature is now working. Now it means that we can commit all of these changes to feature 6 and push everything over to GitHub. Now before doing that, I do want to do a couple of things. I don't want my application to actually crash. I will remove the test crash. I already know that the feature works. And actually let me change the text color for my login button in here because the background is set to teal. Let me just set the text color to be white so we can actually see what is written in there. And if we take a look at the preview, we see that it is now noticeable because previously the text was blue. So that's small change. So with that new feature coded, I can either from Visual Studio or the terminal, I am a bit more used to the terminal, commit these changes and push them over to GitHub. So I will simply execute git commit -am. And what I can do here in the message is say something like solve and set the identifier to the issue that is being solved with this pound sign. So with this message, I can just commit this and push over to the remote. And it is going to be pushed to a new feature 6 branch on the remote. So a new feature 6 branch should be created over on GitHub. Because I added that pound sign and the identifier of the issue to the message, if I navigate back to GitHub and navigate here to the issue, I can see that it is being referenced in here. It is being listed in here as one commit that references this issue. Notice that it says that I added a commit that referenced this issue 13 seconds ago. And I can quickly jump over to this commit. So that is one of the benefits of using issues. You can easily reference what issues are being worked on what commits. So we have this feature ready. Now the next process would be, of course, to create a new pull request. And we already know the drill in here. We create a new pull request. We set the base to be dev and the compare to be this new feature branch. We're going to be creating that new pull request, maybe adding some reviewers, some assignees. The idea here is that as soon as we create the pull request, the continuous integration process gets triggered. Right now, our dev branch is not protected through App Center, but we see indeed these checks taking place. And we know that eventually, when we merge this into test and we merge this into master, these checks are actually going to be protecting those branches. We won't be able to merge if the checks haven't passed. This in here is the entire flow of continuous integration and the way in which even bigger and bigger teams can work seamlessly by making sure that all of these changes are going to build before they are merged into the important branches. So throughout this section, we have already implemented continuous integration through App Center. In the next section, we're going to start to implement continuous quality, which, remember, is still part of the continuous integration process, just divided here in a separate tab inside of App Center. With this, we will still have to change a bit of the configuration that we have inside of our builds, especially the test branch, which we are going to start to use a little bit more. This test branch is not only going to be now testing, but we will check at the configuration for these builds. We will see what changes we have to make so the build is better prepared for the tests to run and maybe for testers to try out the application on their devices.